Obviously, when you change a 24-hour news channel, there's lots of considerations. You've got to change the lighting, change the cameras, change all your galleries, your master control centres, your other operation centres to make sure that they're all fully HD compliant. And we spent a lot of time and money starting in what was about April, I guess, with the planning stage, April 2009 of the planning stage for this, right through to a deployment which was on the 6th of May, so it was the UK election day in 2010. So lots of other considerations we had with HD, especially news gathering. We had to update our camera infrastructure, our satellite trucks, our contribution networks around the world all had to be HD compliant. So we had to do this whilst retaining our motto of being first for breaking news. So speed was of the essence. Everything we had to do had to be at the same speed that we worked in HD. So, as I mentioned earlier, May the 6th in 2010 was the night we launched. It was 2100 on election night in the UK, which, if any of you have been involved in a UK election, it's probably not the most ideal time to launch anything because everyone's mind is elsewhere, but we think we got away with it. We had a very, very busy night, and a couple of weeks before that we managed to do some test events in HD that went to air as well. So on that date we were the first UK news channel to broadcast in HD. So the new server, obviously the server system was a massive consideration with what we wanted to do when we migrated from HD. So we'd been Quantel customers for 5-6 years, so a Quantel system, which some people in this room had been involved in, was installed in our new facility, and that was an SD operation, and we had 150 QView stations across the newsroom floor. We had 16 craft edit suites and various other bits and pieces, and serving all our platforms within Sky News, and all of those had to be considered when we're upgrading to HD. So we moved from Quantel to EVS, and that was probably the biggest step and what was most noticeable by everyone in the newsroom. So all of our journalists, we replaced what was on their corporate machine, so it went from being QView, which was obviously a PC application, moving to a cut-down version of IP Director called Clip Compiler, which we put on sort of 200 plus workstations in the newsroom. We moved our 16 craft edit suites from Final Cut, from Quantel to the Final Cut workstations that are fully integrated with the EVS workflow. So Final Cut Studio was a big part of what we did. We'd already migrated all of our field operations to Final Cut about 18 months prior to this, and this was a chance to complete what we'd had in mind. So we've got a common edit platform across our craft edit operations worldwide, and in the newsroom we were using Clip Compiler, which we'll get to a bit later. So the technical challenges, we needed to remain just as fast in high definition as what we did in SD. So having a director of news or a head of news that is very keen to make sure that we beat the competition, even if it's only by 10 seconds, is very, very important to us. So if we were going to cut up a package, we were going to turn around some media, if we were going to do anything, just because we were going HD wasn't acceptable. So we had to, that was at the forefront of our mind, we had to make sure that everything we did was just as quick. Whilst we were doing all this, we obviously had a 24/7 news channel to keep operational, so that was challenges by itself. We built another gallery out in the car park of our facility in Osterley, and we ran out of there for the best part of 6 months whilst we gutted our main facility and put in HD infrastructure. And we actually ran in SD using all our HD infrastructure for about 3 months to get all our staff used to the equipment before we sort of flicked over on election night to run in HD. And at the same time, we had a massive training program where we had to train over 400 staff, both craft editors and journalists and other producers in the newsroom, to use different applications. And I don't know if you wanted to touch on training a little bit there, Alex.
Training was based around training a group of, I think, 12 or 15 super users. So EVS would train the super users, and the super users would then have enough knowledge to train groups of staff at Sky as individuals. And it meant that we could we had feedback from only a select group of people. It meant that the feedback was much more clear and concise because they knew what they were. We weren't getting random requests from a journalist on a workstation. It went through a chain of command, and the feedback that we got was clear and concise about the training from the super users.
So, and our super users, the 12 or so people, were involved right from the outset. So they came across to EVS's development facility in Liège, where we went and had a look at what was available, and they were involved in the factory acceptance testing right through to training down in the UK facility at Leatherhead, and then eventually we had a proof of concept on site within the newsroom during the lead up, so we could train the users whilst the installation was going on at the same time. So as I mentioned, we've got 200 plus clip compiler seats, which is a IP director application that runs in association with our corporate network. So we use iNews in our newsroom, and the same machine that you use iNews, you use email, you also have clip compiler on it, which allows all of these guys to browse any of their content. It's about 4 seconds after it comes in through any of the ingest ports. They can make basic rough cut edits on any of these workstations. They can then send these rough cuts or clips, sequences of clips that are put together, to either the Clean Edit, which is a slightly more craft edit solution, which some of you I'm sure are familiar with, or the Final Cut solution. So once you send it into an edit suite, it sort of pre-populates your bin and gives you a rough cut on the timeline to start with. And that's a workflow that we were it was very important as we were mimicking or trying to keep similar what we were doing with Quantel for the newsroom, to keep the change to as little as possible. We needed to keep that workflow in place that had worked very well for us over the last 5 years. So a number of challenges with that. Obviously Final Cut Pro, before this wasn't tightly integrated with EVS, but the EVS team wrote a plugin which allows us to export that content straight from the Final Cut timeline. So you basically export a sequence with a particular file name, and whilst that is exporting, if you're familiar with the way Final Cut works, it comes up with a progress bar when you're doing a final export. In the first few percentage of that, once it's starting to export, the first few frames will be available on your playout server, so you could actually play out the top of the package while the rest of it's still rendering, and it gives you a degree of confidence with a sort of a traffic light system in the bottom corner, sort of red, amber and green, whether if you press play in the gallery you're going to get the pictures out the other end. And that, as anyone who works in a news channel knows, journalists and editorial folk like to work right up till 10 seconds before the package is due to go to air, and it works quite well. We also had to write an application, or the EVS guys had to write an application to work within within iNews. So I'm just trying to remember the chap's name within EVS who wrote that. Anyway.
Yes, Sebastian, I think. But
yes. Yeah. So an application was written in association with iNews, which allows you to see the assets within an EVS database within iNews, and you can drag and drop them into your rundown.
Yeah, we developed an ActiveX plugin that's just a very simple iNews plugin, and basically it browses the content of our system wherever that's stored, whether it's a file on a SAN or whether it's even on the ingest and the playout servers. We can browse the content, and it's just a drag and drop process to associate the media on our system with the slug in iNews.